All right, hello, welcome everyone to Critique Revolve on Rain Man Digital. I am Michael Flores, your host for today's discussion and review, and I'm joined by Thomas and David. Hello, guys.
Hello.
How's it going?
All right, so in this episode, we are going to discuss Watcher, which is a 2022 American psychological thriller film written and directed by Chloe Okuna, based on an original screenplay by Zach Ford. Which original screenplay is up in the air. We're going to talk about that in a second because David has some ideas that it feels more like a remake of a very famous movie.
Yes.
And we'll get to that in a moment. The film stars Maika Monroe, Carl Glusman, and Bern Gorman. The film had its premiere at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival, which is a festival that doesn't cater to subpar features for the most part, so that was a good sign going into this movie. The synopsis: Julia joins her husband when he relocates to his family's native Romania for a new job. Having recently abandoned her acting career, she finds herself frequently alone and unoccupied. One night, people watching from her picture window, she spots a vague figure in an adjacent building who seems to be looking back at her. Soon after, while alone at a local movie theater, Julia's sense of being watched intensifies, and she becomes certain she's being followed. Could it be the same unknown neighbor, or is it someone far more nefarious with designs to do harm? Running time is a lean 96 minutes. It's distributed by IFC Films and is available to stream on AMC Plus and also to rent at the numerous other streaming outlets across the interwebs. Now, before we move into the film any further, I want to say that if you have not checked out AMC Plus yet, you're missing out.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
In an era where there are dozens of streaming platforms, it's hard to find the ones with the most high quality content as opposed to the most content, meaning the streaming wars that we're currently in has become almost a battle between quality over quantity. And for someone like me, a streaming service like AMC Plus and Apple TV that has a fraction of the content of, say, Disney Plus and Netflix, they have a far better shows. And that will always win me over quantity. I'm about quality. And that's what AMC and Apple TV are both doing currently. They have a dozen or more shows that revolve throughout the year. And they focus on writing, on detail. And they also do the same thing from the film side. So not only do they have streaming shows, they have films that debut exclusively on their platforms. AMC has actually moved to my top 5 must-have streaming services over the last year and a half.
Wow.
With the content they have.
It's just the quality. The quality is actually kind of underappreciated. It's like no one talks about it because when you look at the quality that they do, it's far beyond a lot of things where when you look at other streaming services, it's just let's throw out this, see what sticks to the wall.
Yeah. With
Their quality, it's kind of like, no, we're going to actually go in and actually give chances to proven products. And the director of today's film, I was really excited for her because it is going to be like their directorial debut. But I've known about this director since another film that basically inspired me, VHS 94, which
that's
is
your type of thing.
That's my type of thing. And their installment in VHS 94 was excellent. It was just really well done. And it's kind of like when I think about them getting this opportunity now, I'm like going, yeah, they deserve that opportunity because of that one past work. And it feels like AMC is like saying, we're going to give them a chance because of that.
You get the sense that Chloe Okuna is a fan of film, which I know that sounds silly to say, but believe it or not, there's a lot of directors nowadays that have come up in the mid-2000s, late 90s that aren't really film fans. In fact, I believe Brett Ratner said something in an interview once where he says he doesn't care about movies. He doesn't like movies.
Yes.
I'm like, well, I can tell in your work.
I can tell in your work.
And I can feel like or I should say, and it seems like a lot of directors aren't necessarily fans of film or fans of genre anymore, like genre programming. And when you get someone like Chloe Okuna, because this movie isn't perfect, but there's definitely an eye to a style of film that used to be made.
Yes.
The classic psychological thrillers of old that are not made anymore. And you feel like this seems like, to me, like her paying tribute to what came before.
Yeah.
You feel her love for the genre. And that, to me, goes the distance for any film that I review or sit down to watch. If I feel that there's passion in your directing and how you're tackling the subject matter, you get a little more leeway when it comes to how I'm going to receive your film.
Yeah, and especially since she kind of comes off from the kind of like the film school, film independent filmmaker like us, where it's like, if you look at her past works, as I said, VHS 94, when she did her short Storm Drain, fan-freaking-tastic. It was fun. Then she did her one short that got a lot of awards, and I saw it like twice. It's called Slut.
Mm-hmm.
Really good. She deserved all the awards she got and acclamation for it. And I'm like going, that's the type of person that deserves to get a feature film. And it baffles my mind that basically in today's world you have things like Netflix and Disney Plus that they just willy-nilly give like projects to people, but they don't think about like the person's skill.
That's not important today.
Or their passion.
Their passion. It's they're a big name. They have a big following.
Do they have a grasp on film as an art?
Yes.
Do they have that grasp? And I feel like a lot of directors nowadays and writers across the board, TV, I don't feel like they actually have studied what they're writing.
I think that a lot of, especially writers, consider themselves writers because they've watched TV.
Yes.
And like I had this conversation with somebody else. There's a lot of things I've seen today that are close but no cigar. Like they are imitators of what they've seen beforehand. I mean, I might get some shit for this, but Abbott Elementary won the Emmy for Best Original Pilot or something like that for a comedy series.
Mm-hmm.
It is simply, what if The Office was in a school?
Exactly.
But it doesn't understand the timing. It doesn't understand the intricacies of characters.
Nuances.
It doesn't understand the heartfelt message behind the characters' actions. It's just, what if we had a bunch of random goofy people who would never be allowed within 20 feet of children and made them the teachers? Because the camera movement's the same and the style's the same. But it's just a simulacrum. It imitates without understanding.
Yes.
And that's what a lot of movies and TVs do these days, is the people who make them are like, yeah, I've seen Jaws. So I can do this.
I can do this. It's easy.
And it doesn't understand what actually goes into crafting something. And it feels like Kinko's versus like somebody with sculpting clay.
A really good example I brought up in another show of ours was like the comparison of SNL now, Saturday Night Live now, compared to Saturday Night Live back in the day.
Almost ever previously.
Yeah. And it's like Saturday Night Live now is like Kinko's. They try to actually do the jokes that, oh, hey, we're going to do the same joke that we did 20 years ago, but try to do a spin on it.
It's the little kid who runs away from the parents and everyone's like, oh, look at them go, laughing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do it again. And they get a little bit of a laugh. So they do it again. And you have that diminishing returns until everyone's pissed off, like, just fucking sit here, and they get taped to the chair. Like, that's what I feel like SNL is now. They're like, they only do jokes that they know the internet will approve or that they've done before.
Yeah. Okay, so there is, and this goes back to what you're talking about now, Thomas, as well as what you mentioned with, was it The Office you had mentioned?
Abbott Elementary and The Office,
okay, so there's also, when you're working within a genre or you're trying to do something that's been done before, there's also there also needs to be an understanding of the cultural context of what drove that genre when it started, so that you can try to make it apply to what's going on in today's world if you can. For example, the rise of the psychological thriller, now you can go back centuries in literature and there's going to be those types of stories, but within film, a lot of it has to do with the culture of paranoia. You know, the Cold War, the 60s and 70s, when people weren't quite sure what was happening in society, the general anxieties of progress and change.
Mistrust of the government, being lied to and gaslit by our own government.
Yeah. And I feel like that's why this movie understands not just how to make a movie in a correct fashion, but also the genre that it's working within, because look at the times we're living in today. We live in times of paranoia again, brought on by high levels of anxiety because we don't know where our culture's going. So a lot of that was also built into this film with this idea of a woman being a fish out of water in a new environment, in a place that is alien to her. And that, in a lot of ways, reflects or refracts many of our own consensus of how we live our life today. We find ourselves in a time that we don't quite understand. And there's a lot of anxiety behind that. All right, so moving into the review discussion portion, I do want to stay away from spoilers because I would like people to check this film out. But to get things kicked off, why don't we start with initial thoughts on the film? Let's keep it brief to about 60 to 90 seconds apiece, and we'll start with you, David.
Partly, you guys already know my initial thoughts. I was really excited about this. Initially, there was only one hesitation I had, which was when I saw the trailer, I was immediately thinking, okay, I know Chloe can do this type of story, and it just seemed very simplistic to me. And I was like going, okay, how are you going to hook us? You just can't hook us using this idea that this woman is on her own and she's the victim. You make a victim story, right? And I was thinking to myself, okay, I'm seeing elements of Rear Window automatically from the trailer.
Right.
And the only thing that made me more excited was the fact that you see Chloe's name on it. And me as a fan, I was like going, okay, the trailer didn't do it justice. But I know that Chloe can actually pull off something good. And that's what brought me into the movie, was like my expectations were kind of average.
But did your were your expectations met?
Yes.
For the most part.
I thought Chloe did a fine job. The movie, automatically, I was like really worried I wouldn't get into it. I thought it was going to be a focus on, like victim blaming and,
gaslighting.
I feel like there's a little nervousness comes with a lot of those things nowadays, because when you go and Google, everything is, according to some people, everything's woke nowadays. And when you type in this film into Google, people are talking about it on Reddit as a feminist psychological thriller. And I'm like, okay, in your mind, what qualifies as a feminist woke piece? Because first off, feminism shouldn't be synonymous with woke. Okay, number one. Number two, I wouldn't even call this any type. I don't feel like feminist theory was used to sculpt this film in any way.
Not in any way.
Now, I'm not saying it's anti-feminist, but I also don't think that was the point of the film in any way. Just because you have a female who's a lead and she's at the center of things and her husband shrugs her off because he feels like she is going crazy, it doesn't make him a meanie
Welcome
beanie.
to the horror genre.
But
exactly, Thomas. That's what
but see, all those.
Oh my God, someone got murdered. Yeah. That's why.
But all those concepts that you're mentioning,
but the woman wasn't murdered, which means it's woke.
In a lesser filmmaker's hands, it could easily have gone that way.
Absolutely.
This story could have easily gone that way if it didn't have a strong director behind it.
Now, I will say that ending where she eyeballs so-and-so and then fade out, that could probably serve as an example.
That was earned.
We'll talk about, it was earned. We'll talk about that when we get into spoilers at the end. But
I mean, that comes down to, some of this movie is going to come down to subjective interpretation, which is always going to be part of art and film in particular. But I wouldn't say that on the surface level there's anything about this that would qualify it as woke. It's simply kind of, and that might be its greatest criticism from me, at least, is that it's fairly boilerplate. The plot is as deep as a fucking sticky
As
note.
a sticky note.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing when you look at most horror movies, but that might be the biggest thing where I was like, okay, like kind of what else do you have?
What else you got?
And I don't know if that's necessarily a fair criticism, because while I don't know if I respect the movie for not trying to overreach and make something convoluted and dumb that it couldn't achieve, rather than, you know what, this is what we're going to do with this concept, let's just nail what we're trying to achieve.
Yes.
So it's like, do you admire the guy who went for the B and stuck the landing, or the C+ and stuck the landing, or is it better that he didn't try for the A
Nowadays,
in that scenario, or she didn't try for the A?
That's an interesting
It's an
thought.
interesting thought, but nowadays, I think I rather look at it nowadays as stick your landing. Just stick your landing.
And I think with someone whose career is fairly new. Or at least don't have the repertoire that a lot of other people have,
because I see
that makes sense. That's the smarter play from a career.
I feel like so you guys are kind of saying the same thing, and I agree with both of you actually, because the movie is relative, or the plot itself is relatively simple, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I guess I side with David where he says, hey, let's just stick the landing, because in today's environment, there are a lot of people who want to stick the landing, but when they land, they also want to do a backflip.
Everyone wants to be Game of Thrones.
Or everyone used to, the saying used to be, everyone wants to do the Shyamalan.
They all want to be
Yeah.
M.
They wanna
Night.
be
M. Night can't even be M. Night anymore.
Not anymore.
I don't know if he ever was.
That is a good point. M. Night might have
Yeah,
after
you
a
get
certain
the
point,
argument.
He
Yeah.
might have just gotten lucky. But yeah. So for me, in a lot of ways, Watcher works a lot like a classic psychological film of old. It's
Yes.
a relatively simple plot, but simplicity doesn't mean that the narrative isn't tightly constructed to convey the appropriate aesthetics needed to create a world of mysterious elusivity, where the viewer shares, and this is the part that I like the most, where the viewer shares in the subjective confusion of the protagonist as they attempt to discover what is real in a world that is seemingly fabricated by either paranoia, psychosis, and or loneliness. And Watcher, creates a type of cinematic, I guess you can say, what's that philosophical theory, phenomenology that assists in bringing the viewer into a shared experience with the protagonist.
Yes.
It's a subjective approach that can be compared to what is called a limited third-person type of narration, where we only know what the active narrator knows and or sees. And overall, for me, this approach worked to keep me guessing and invested throughout the film. That is where I find the value of the film, and it's that the shared experience with the protagonist, the second guessing, the questions that are presented. Who's going to be the killer? Is it her husband? Is it her friend down the hallway? Is it the miscellaneous dude out the window? Is it the family that stares at her across the window? I like that they present a lot of possibilities, even though, and I'm going to save this for the spoiler section. Yeah, because there is problems. There's certain issues that I have with that.
See, I don't know if I'd agree with your previous statement, but I also don't want to get too much into
Spoiler territory.
Save it for the spoilers, because I do want to talk about it, because I know what you're going to say, and I agree. But I don't want to. I want to be careful,
Right?
Because they
don't give any spoilers.
Let me. You know what? Enough time has passed that people may not know what I'm going to talk about to connect it to what I just said. So maybe it won't be a spoiler. So they presented various ideas, but they ended up going with the obvious.
Yes.
And that was my only problem with this movie, was rather than going with the not so obvious, they go with the one that we had expected the whole time.
And in a way, is that better or worse for it? There's an argument for both sides.
Absolutely. Maybe she thought, the director, Chloe Okuna, was like, well, you know what? Let's play with the obvious. Sometimes the obvious isn't the obvious.
Is the obvious.
Yeah, I know that sounds ridiculous, but
sometimes
there's a logic.
The color orange is orange.
Sometimes, actually, there is some truth.
Do you get what I'm saying, though?
No,
I do,
like,
but we're trying not to say too much.
Yeah, we're not trying not to say
We're
too much.
speaking in riddles here.
The
The
beautiful thing
crow
about
caws at midnight, and the cat sours the ladle.
But like, I definitely you hit it on the head about the philosophy aspect, because like it's very easy nowadays to make your audience, if you're the writer, basically the audience is the one that bases, oh, it's going this way, it's going this way. You as the writer or the creator can simply say, this is the true answer, but you fill around let the audience run away with their own thoughts.
So that's might be where it kind of falls shorter to me, or again, is it admirable because it didn't overreach?
Exactly.
Because I think that the directing is great. The visuals are solid. There's a distinct style. There's a distinct tone that is set through the color palette, through the mood, through the lighting, all of that. I think the performances are fucking great. They're subtle when needed. They're not overt. They're not over the top.
They're not trying to oversell it.
And it all works. It's like perfectly seasoned. It's not too much salt or too much ketchup or whatever the hell you want to put on your, steak or something like that. But I also wonder then, looking at some of the obvious comparisons that this type of movie has, the peers of it, I feel like the script falls a little short. And I'm not, for the first time in a very long time, I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, because so many movies and TV shows I've watched lately are people trying to ape Game of Thrones and Ned Stark's death. Spoiler alert. They're trying to be M. Night Shyamalan. They're trying to be the show that blows your mind. And so many people can't pull that off.
Almost no one can.
Almost no one fucking can. But even if you look at the most iconic movie of this type, Rear Window,
yes,
there is the obvious answer. But there's a better way to build to that.
To it.
That I don't think this achieved.
Well, Alfred Hitchcock wrote that movie, right?
Yes.
Well, I think that's the biggest difference. And you're actually saying a lot of things that I agree with.
Yeah.
Because the directing, just to backtrack just a bit, the directing is the best part of the movie.
It is.
The directing is fantastic. Where the movie does suffer is a little bit within the script. If they had brought someone else on to write the script, or maybe Zach Ford's original script, maybe that was better, because I believe Chloe did the rewrite.
Yeah, she did.
The actual shooting script. So maybe Zach Ford's script was much better, but that's the weakness of the movie, is the script. And I'm not saying it destroys the movie, but where they could have worked some issues out is from the writing aspect. And going back to what you said, Thomas, it's kind of a catch-22. Do you go the obvious route? Do you not go the obvious route? Do you want to go for a more simplistic touch and focus on directing and selling an aesthetic? Or do you fall victim to what all these people do nowadays, which is, I'm going to blow your mind. Even though I have a very low IQ, I'm going to try to do this like Quentin Tarantino.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Is like, if you know you can't do that, it is better to just, as you said, David, stick the landing.
Stick the landing.
So it's like the only criticism I might give, like if I was the teacher in this and this is the student kind of thing, it's like, you did great. I'd love to see you try for more.
Try for more, yeah.
Try to push it more.
I
But then
feel
again,
like,
are you a writer or a director, and what do you really want to do?
Yeah.
So
because that's what
I think there's some validity to what you're saying, because honestly, the movie's lean. It's 96 minutes, and I prefer that.
It is.
I prefer that for these types of movies.
Same.
Although I feel like they could have benefited from about maybe if they added maybe 4 or 5 more pages to the script, giving us a total running time of maybe 100
minutes or
100
something.
minutes.
and maybe that would have helped flesh out some of the minor issues.
One of my favorite of this type of movie, which I don't know if you guys will have seen or remember, Disturbia.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Great example
Great
of
example
this
of it.
with, spoilers, I guess, like the obvious answer kind of thing. But it's 105 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it needs that little bit
build.
more,
It needs
I think.
it
But because I do
more
like
build.
it being lean rather than 2 hours. It doesn't need to be 2 hours for
Because-
these kind of films.
Yeah.
But 10 pages isn't going to make or break anybody at that point.
And the thing is
And this already took 6 weeks to shoot, which is a really very short shooting schedule.
Well,
so,
if you look at their budget too, their budget was only $5 million.
$5 million.
$5 million.
yeah.
And like automatically, if I was in Chloe's shoes, I would have actually chose the route of basically just stick your landing. Follow your
I can
script.
respect that.
First
Follow your
feature
script.
film.
First
Yeah.
feature film, and you just want to get out the doors, get out the gate with a good, solid project first. Okay, bang, and would it be great? Because I get what you're saying too, Thomas. Is like if I was the teacher, I'd be looking at her going, "You did the job, good job. You got a B."
Well, like, and that's the thing. It's like,
But-
you can't get mad.
Yeah, you can't get mad.
But
and
it's like, great job. I'd love to see
I'd
what
love
else you
to
can
see
do.
what else you can do.
Yeah.
Let me see what you can do, because especially since, like, personally, I think that her short work is far better than this film.
Well, short films are a totally different type of medium too, and maybe
Exactly.
that's what she's used to doing. Because doesn't she have about 4 or 5 shorts under her belt?
Yes, I believe so.
I
think
could be
it's
As a
wrong.
director, she has 4.
She's got Slut. She's got
Full Circle, Slut, the .coms, and the VHS
and the VHS.
segment.
Okay.
So 4.
All right. So let's get into some directing stuff, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to get into some spoilers. So quickly, I have a few things to say. Most of it has been stated, but I want to formally restate it, I guess, just so it's formal.
Recontextualize?
Yeah, I guess so. All right. So Chloe, as we have mentioned numerous times, she's relatively new as a director. This is her first foray into feature film directing. Psychological films are not easy to do, first and foremost. They're not. In fact, they're one of the more difficult films to write, but even more so to direct. And that's why I give her applause for doing such a great job directing. Because as the director, you have to choose the right shots and construct blocking that will sell those shots. You have to sell the paranoia. You have to sell the mystery. And that may sound easier than it actually is, because it's not. There's a psychological dichotomy between reality and illusion that needs to be stated. It needs to be put into your film. And the director has to convey that without falling too far into the abstract, which does happen in a lot of psychological films that are not that great. A good director has to find ways to reify the elements of the psychological. Otherwise, you can end up losing the audience completely to contradictory perception.
Yes.
Now, not to say there's something wrong with that in itself, but a film has to be designed as such prior and not fall into notions of the avant-garde solely because of inadequate direction. I feel like avant-garde style of filmmaking has grown in popularity.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say avant-garde, just abstract, not true avant-garde in the way of art,
Okay.
but just abstract, overly abstract things. And a lot of that I don't feel like is style necessarily. I feel like it's inadequacies in talent. Well, I'm not really quite sure how to convey this in a more concrete way, so let's just leave it open for interpretation.
Let's leave it open for interpretation.
The catch-all easy answer, right?
And
Let's let the clown let go of the balloon in the end.
And I'm good with that. Like, and I know that might sound funny coming from me, someone who loves the abstract and loves the avant-garde, and I do, but not everyone can do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like people need to understand their talents. And I think Chloe did a great job walking that line before because sometimes you can run the risk of just taking that dive into not really explaining things and leaving things up for interpretation. And I had a feeling, because this movie was 96 minutes and we were approaching the end of the time, because I watched the running time when I watched things for review purposes, and I was getting nervous. I was like, there's fucking 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I thought different direction.
yeah, I thought it was just going to end without any explanation, and I was going to fucking just throw my remote right at the TV. Luckily, they did not do that. And because this movie is a psychological thriller, in order for it to be effective in such a genre, it must adhere to some core tenets of the genre. And for greater context, psychological thrillers often incorporate elements of mystery, drama, action, and paranoia. This one I felt like really privileged paranoia. The genre is closely related to and sometimes overlaps with psychological drama and one of my favorite horror subgenres, psychological horror.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
It really
Very
is.
difficult to do.
And
It inherently you have to be smarter to do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
You
it's
just have
cerebral.
to, because
have
it's
to be
all
very
cerebral. And if it's to be effective, we have to not know what's happening, but it all has to make sense at the end, and that's fucking hard.
And, and that's incredible. It's incredibly difficult now.
It is not an easy genre.
Meanwhile, the other version's like, and then they stab them, and they were wearing a mask.
And it's incredibly difficult when you think about it, because in that regard, you have to get your whole audience to fully dive and invest in this one character, meaning your audience could be so diverse, and you
have to set up an experience.
You have
not
to set a
person.
An experience that basically everyone could get on board and say, "Oh my God, yeah, I can see myself getting caught in something like this," even if it's just a little tidbit. And that's what I thought was actually genius of like Chloe, was like she was able to actually make, I feel, her audience feel for this one character.
It's very effective, in setting up the empathy for the protagonist.
And when
like,
you think about
we
it,
can easily feel like she does.
And when you think about it nowadays, especially in the horror genre, I've seen so many horrors the last 5 years that try to make the audience legitimately scared and filled with tension without doing a jump scare, but they can't. They can't.
I think I had one.
And here, Chloe was able to build that tension up naturally because we all got on board with the character.
Yeah, I feel like, and we're gonna get into this in the spoilers. We're gonna talk about the more effective aspects of the film when it comes to the psychological and how it pertains to Chloe's shot selection after we go to break. You know what? Let's just do that. I think we're ready now. Let's just go to break, and when we come back, we'll get into these things. If you don't want to have the movie ruined for you, pause, go watch the movie, and then come back. Okay, we are back. So Watcher was effective in using various aspects from a list of psychological themes, and those themes are death, existence/purpose, identity, mind, perception, and reality. Those are typically the themes that guide a psychological piece.
Yes.
Now, not all those themes were used in this film. Some were used more than others, but the ones that were used were utilized appropriately, and they convey the right ideas and or feelings. In fact, there were a few key moments that stood out to me. Number one is the large windows that encompassed one side of the home. From the very beginning, I knew, because I didn't know a lot about this movie going in. And the way just the set was designed with the large windows that encompassed the entire
living room to the bedroom
with no curtains at first. I was like, where are the fucking curtains?
Yeah.
Where are the curtains?
Yeah.
Who lives like this? What are you, a zoo animal? People could just look at you through windows. It bothered me. I always watch for little things here and there when it comes to those aspects. And I figured the windows would be playing a big part, since, of course, the movie's called Watcher. Doesn't take that much of a leap to figure that out. But the thing that was most effective for me was we'll just say it, the killer, who was staring at her from the very beginning of the movie during the storm. That, to me, was one of the most effective shots. Now, there were others, but that was the one that really made my skin crawl. The fact that you have the protagonist trying to settle into her new home, the vibe sells the idea that everything's very unfamiliar. She feels alienated. So she just starts looking out the windows and it feels like she's trying to gain a bit of the lay of the land, if you will. And as it rains, she looks up, and the viewer, from her perspective, we see just a really quick an outline of someone, but we're not quite sure that we saw anything because the rain is
obscuring the view,
running down the window. And we sit there trying to see through the rain for a good 5 to 10 seconds, and then at the most unlikely moment, we see the figure still staring.
Yes.
And then she walks across the house to see if it's following her, and the figure is still watching her. And this goes on for most of the first act, right? Where there's numerous moments where she will look through the windows and she sees that it doesn't matter what time of the day, there's this silhouette looking at her through this window.
Yeah.
And then this is the moment that actually made me feel really uncomfortable. And it's when she decided, all right, let me see if this guy's really looking at me, or is this just in my head? She waves at him.
Waves at him.
And the guy doesn't wave back, or the figure doesn't wave back. So she looks down and she feels relief. And we feel relief for a second as well. But we see something that she doesn't.
She doesn't.
And we see the hand slowly raise in the
wave
background.
is the best moment
It's
for me.
so fucking creepy, man.
There's the shot. There's the two shots that I love. The blurred, him slowly raising his hand.
Yes.
While it's out of focus because we're where she is,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and we're the friend watching. Like, dude, turn around. That is great. But the clear as day, perfectly outlined silhouette of the still man.
God,
Silently
Silently
waving. Because
waving.
Randy was watching it with me,
It's
and
creepy.
she's like, "Fuck that!"
And think about- think
that
about-
is definitely creepy.
And
that was
that's-
effective.
That's what I love about the simplicity of it, is because
Yeah.
it's not like one of the ghost stories where they focus on, oh my god,
You
it's
know,
so
old Lady
horrific.
Jensen
Yeah.
died in that room.
It's just a guy
Folks say
staring
they still
out the
hear
window.
knocking on the doors.
Yeah.
You know.
How do you make such a simplistic image terrifying? And
Well, you need a creep like, and I mean this in the most respectful way. Bern Gorman, like he fucking
He always plays
he
creeps.
Nails that type.
He nailed
He
it.
just fucking is that character. You might be a lovely person in life, but dude, you do that so well. It's creepily effective.
Yeah.
and you need that.
And think about the direction of about it too, is just basically telling your actor, hey, you don't have to do anything, just stand there.
Yeah,
Stand there and
he does very little,
he
which is
does
incredibly
very little,
effective.
and it affects you a lot.
Well, that's
like my favorite moment was absolutely the rain one was awesome. The wave thing was awesome, but I love the theater scene. The
Yeah,
theater
that's
scene,
creepy.
the theater scene just took the creepiness of the window and made it to me more tangible.
Explain the theater scene briefly.
And the theater scene is when she goes in and she's been trying to actually she's
trying to escape someone who's
escape.
following her,
She's trying to escape,
or at least to see if someone's
yeah,
following her.
if someone's following her, because she's not sure, because at this point everyone thinks like she's going crazy. And then like she takes a seat and we as the audience just see the silhouette all in dark and only lit by the projector. The figure just follow and he just sits
And
right
he merges
behind
with her silhouette.
And he merges. And I'm like going,
That's such a good shot.
it was such an awesome shot, because I was like going, is Chloe trying to say, does the guy actually, for the first time in the movie, I was like, does the guy actually exist, or is it in her head? Because
Yeah.
what is it?
Yeah.
He literally merged with her behind her, and I was like, maybe he's not real.
That's what I was thinking when they did the shot like that. Immediately, I went to the metaphor. Are they trying to say that it's just her?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a genius way of actually telling a story with so little dialogue, but
It's
all
very
action.
good at visually telling the story.
Visually telling the
What?
It is a
What?
movie, and I think that's twofold. Twofold. I think that's partly because of the context of the setup of the narrative. She doesn't know the language. Brilliant to not have the subtitles translate for the audience.
Yes.
I love
Yes.
that, because it makes us sit there saying, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
And we feel alienated.
And we too feel alienated. So,
Yeah.
like I said, it does a great job of putting us in the protagonist's shoes, but also that I'm losing my. Sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. The sense of not knowing what people are saying
Yes.
is great for isolation purposes.
For isolation. Well, not only that, because like doing that again set us up to feel like our main character.
Well, we're supposed to doubt her as well. We're
Yeah.
not. We're not. Even though it's from her, we're viewing most of what's going on from her perception. We're also supposed to doubt our own thoughts,
Our own
just
thoughts,
like she is
exactly.
doubting. So yeah, and that's all done through directing. Now, where the movie falls a little bit for me, as we said, is the writing. It's some of the things that they could have done a little differently. For example, I feel like the movie would have been more effective if the killer was not the guy in the window. I know that's asking for a twist, and
It
I
is.
just said simple is better, but also you set up the killer at the very beginning, and I really liked what they did when they went over to the guy's house to confront him.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel sorry for the guy, because the guy is all like, I live here with my dad. I take care of my dad. Why are you putting us through this? And you felt for a moment a little bit of sympathy, like, okay, well, he is not the bad guy. So they throw you off a bit, but then they also introduce at the very beginning of the movie the idea that a serial killer is on the loose.
The spider.
That to me was also weak because you're setting us up for the obvious. And maybe like I said, maybe the obvious was to throw us off because it's too obvious.
I feel like that's where they messed up when it comes to the script. Okay, so you
agree? Yeah.
So the script, they show up to the apartment, they move in, it rains, she's uncomfortable, creepy guy in the window, then there's a murder next door.
Mm-hmm.
2 separate scenes. We've taken about 10 to 15 minutes for this. Mm-hmm. What it should have been is, all right, here's where we live. The night of a murder. Because that would have been a great way to put some paranoia into her mind for us as the audience. You just moved in and there's someone died across the street. Are you really going to sleep? And then you see someone in the window. And then you start to think maybe that's the murderer. Like, to me, there was long stretches of setup for what is ultimately the obvious.
Yes. Yep.
Without doing enough psychological manipulation, which is traditional of a thriller like this. There's not questioning whether or not he's real by anyone else. There's paranoia on her part, but for me, I was like, no, you're absolutely right. Like, it's clearly this guy.
Yes.
Like, there was never a moment of me wondering. At one point, I thought, is it the friend next door? Because that'd be different, you know. But it's the whole time, to me, I'm like, it's very obviously this guy, and that's it. Without doing enough of fucking with her mind. Her being isolated in a new country that you don't speak the language is a perfect setting for, I don't trust the neighbors. I don't trust the woman who lives next to us. I don't trust the old lady looking for a cat. They're all in on it. Like a Wicker Man / Stepford Wives vibe.
Hostile as well.
Yes,
Hostile would have been more to raise the stakes and tension for the whole movie. Because instead, I just feel like she's 100% right. Why are we all even asking, has the cops looked at this guy?
Yeah.
He looks like a murderer. like immediately. So for me, I was just kind of like waiting for the movie to catch up to what was essentially the movie's story.
And that's where we go right back to what we said. Simple versus a little more complicated.
Right. So where do you good?
Right. And or perhaps maybe they could have split the difference. Maybe not go with the obvious. You know, maybe keep your plot relatively simple and just offer us maybe other alternatives, because they did set it up to where, sure, to us it was obvious that he was going to be the killer, but they also introduced all these other players for reasons, and those reasons were to make us think possibly they're also involved in some way.
See,
or maybe
I did not
they're
get
the killers.
That sense.
But the thing is also,
I feel maybe it's my own viewing habits, and that's how I interpret it, that these people very well could also be a part of it.
Well, like a Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, in fact, there was a moment where I thought the stripper friend might have been a part of it.
Well, I thought that was the only one that had any weight, because she was the only named character who had screen time that we've interacted with who's earned her trust. Yeah. So to me, I'm like, she's luring this woman, even if this guy is the killer or if she herself is the killer, she's a part of the bait and murder bit.
The thing is,
it would explain why she was missing when they went to the cat. Because at first, my thought too of that cat scene, like, oh no, the cat knocked over the lamp. I'm like, no one's going to check the closet. No one's going to look in the bathroom.
But the thing that I kind of understand the way it ends, especially the way that they chose to have the final shot.
I will say I did not see that coming.
The final shot, I thought that's why we go with the obvious, because that's the message.
It plays
overall.
With the suspense.
It plays with the suspense.
And I thought had it actually gone the way it was looking it was going to go, and just close the curtains on that, I would have been like, that's fucking dark.
Okay, let's backtrack just a second so that people understand what we're talking about. Right. We have to explain the scene. So the ending that you're talking about, David, was when the killer returns to the scene of the crime where he murders the stripper friend.
The stripper friend.
And we hear the stripper friend's phone ringing when the protagonist is trying to call her.
Yes.
And she hears the phone in the house, or I should say the apartment adjacent to her.
Playing.
Yeah, that's right. And the music plays. That's what it is. So when they already have said or established that there's no one there, but suddenly now there's noises going on over there. So just to keep it simple, the protagonist, Julia, goes over there to check things out. She is nearly killed by the serial killer who confronts her. And now we know as the audience that this is the official killer here. And just as he seemingly murders Julia, he leaves the apartment and he happens to run into Julia's husband, who doubted her the entire movie.
Yes.
That moment right there was a very suspenseful moment. I did like that.
I like
that.
that.
Was
Yes.
powerful.
That was powerful.
And then out of nowhere, Julia, who baited the killer into this scenario because she knew there was a gun in the room, she shoots him from behind.
She shoots him from behind. And then she turns to her husband.
And
It
that's
says,
how
I want a divorce.
that's what followed.
Well, That's what
100%.
followed.
A Marriage Story was actually the sequel.
Because
But-
that look was furious.
That
It was
look
like,
was
bitch, I
furious.
told you.
Yeah.
I told
100%
that's-
in her right.
I
that's
fucking
the-
love that look,
Yeah,
dude.
it's great.
Yeah.
It was so good. What a
And-
way to end a movie.
And that's the thing I feel why they go with the obvious. Because in a lot of ways, Julia was looking us at the audience and say, hey, I told you it was this dude. Like,
Yes, but while that was effective and great towards fuck you, bro, you weren't listening, us as the audience is like already on that same page. I felt like
Yeah.
what I anticipated happening was he either walks away and the husband misses him by that much and she's actually dead. And that would have been a way to feel like a cunt for the rest of your life for not listening to her. But that would have been more of to me, like
atypical.
a real life horror story.
Yeah.
That shit happens. That there are people who are dead by that close and almost get away with it, or who are almost caught and it doesn't happen. Or would the husband, seeing him come out, have the stones or balls to confront this guy and go into that room, or would we just fade away, kind of thing? The gun surprised the shit out of me because I was like, she's dead.
Yeah.
Like, she's bleeding like the Kool-Aid Man, and I'm convinced at that point. But that's like, I don't necessarily hold it against it because that's me asking for something different.
Yeah.
Almost.
But,
And if you
but
think about
also
it-
look at everything we're talking about. Once again, it goes back to the directing. The directing
Right.
was
That's what I was gonna say, yeah.
100% effective.
It was great.
Because in a way, Chloe stuck to her guns. Because just like you said, she
Yeah.
could have gone this way. But instead, she went with this ending because she wanted to get her point across.
Yeah.
Right.
And as a director, I admire that basically you stick to your gun, you stick to your convictions of basically this is your story, this is how it is. And I'm with you. I would have expected, after I viewed it, I was expected this. They could have done this just like any other horror film. But then I stopped myself and I said, well, wait a minute. That would make this film any other horror film.
Right.
That's
and
true.
And
That's
Chloe,
also true.
Chloe would not want that because that's her directorial debut. She wants people to talk about this. She wants people to actually say, this is different.
Yeah.
Even though it could be simple. She's
Yeah.
going to take a simple story and make it stick.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it's effective in what it sets out to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So the general reception is mostly favorable for the film. Rotten Tomatoes is giving it an average of 87%. Yeah, am I reading this right? Yeah, 87% of 127 critics' reviews are positive with an average rating of 6.9 out of 10. The website consensus reads, although its story may lack surprises, watcher benefits from director Chloe Okuna's chilling grip on the material. So it seems like a lot of people are agreeing with what we think as well.
yeah.
Micah Monroe's terrific work in the leading role. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 70 out of 100 based on 23 critics. 23 critics, that seems a little low, indicating generally favorable reviews. Lena Wilson of the New York Times called it one of this century's most arresting tales of female anxiety. That's a bit much. I mean, one of this century's? I mean, that's what, 22 years? I mean,
21 technically.
That's a little hyperbolic.
yeah, I don't know. Calm down there, Lena Wilson. Okay, so that being said, places that people can watch this film briefly, it is available for streaming for free on AMC Plus. You can get a 7-day trial for free, obviously, and then after that, if you choose to stay around, you can. I would suggest staying with that after the 7-day trial. Also, there's the typical places that people can review and buy as well. It's available on Amazon to rent, Google Play, YouTube, Vudu, Microsoft, DirecTV, and Apple TV. Okay, so final thoughts as well as RMD score. I'm going to keep my thoughts simple. I like the movie. I enjoyed it. I do recommend others to check it out, at least for the directing finesse, how to properly direct a psychological thriller. I'll give it an 83% on the RMD score. Go ahead, Thomas.
So for me, while it is incredibly well directed, it is very rudimentary and very simple, and I have a really hard time deciding if I like or don't like that so much. For me, I would say if you're an avid horror fan and you, depending on what you like horror for, and honestly, it's more of a thriller than a horror. If you like it for horror staples like gore, violence, scary moments, it's going to miss. If you like thriller for the type of mood and world it can build and put you in, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. But I don't necessarily know how much I'd recommend it if you're not in one of those two camps. So for me, I'm going to give it a 75. It's incredibly well made. It's incredibly well done. But as I said earlier, I would have loved to see it be pushed farther.
How dare you,
So that's
Thomas.
a little subjective, but there's nothing bad about this movie.
I'm going to give your final thoughts on 12%.
Okay.
12%.
I think fucking Hellboy did better than that.
Just joking. Go ahead, David. Keep it brief. We got to close out.
Yeah, my final thoughts on this one. It met the expectations I was really hoping for. I wasn't thinking like, this was going to knock everyone's socks off and it was going to be like a 90 or anything. I was expecting kind of like, hey, stick the landing. This is your directorial debut. Just make it count. And it's kind of funny because Rotten Tomatoes, now normally I never agree with Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
But like I would give this an 86. I actually am near their 87 range.
It's a little skewed, right? Because Rotten Tomatoes is giving it a higher score.
Yes.
And the actual official critics, but the fans are, I believe it's at like a 63%.
Yeah, because like
I think these are horror babies. The ones who are like, oh, where's the blood and violence? Oh.
Well, like I said, they're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, that's the thing is like when you look at it nowadays, especially in the horror genre, everyone just swades automatically to
gore nowadays,
blood and violence, and almost like the idea of a suspense thriller is now kind of thrown to the wayside, and people don't put a lot of stock into it.
It's the reason why the new Halloween films suck. Because it's not about building any type of anxiety and paranoia that you're being followed and being watched. No, we're just going to show you everything.
Killer shows up and then does something graphic.
Yeah, it's just an excuse to get gory, and that's it.
And a lot of screaming for some strange reason.
Yeah,
but like that's where I think I honestly, as a filmmaker, I'm kind of like you, Thomas. I wouldn't recommend it for like mass audiences because a lot of mass audiences have this set idea of a horror film.
See, that's an interesting point of view from both of you guys.
I would recommend this to filmmakers out there.
That's what I was about to say.
This is a story that needs to be put out there so that people can study it.
This is a movie for people who like films, in my opinion. This isn't kind of a catch-22. You're writing a psychological horror, and yet it may not appeal to the people who want those bloody psychological pieces or horror pieces. This is going to appeal more to people who want to sit down and watch a well-directed
suspense
film.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you're giving it an 86%, Dave?
Yeah, an 86.
Okay, well, this does bring us to the end of our review. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, David and Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.